When I started out with my first photography class, I was immediately hooked with this art form. I loved photography, but my photographs didn't always turn out the way I wanted them to. And I found it to be a really frustrating process because I would have these images in my mind, my photos did not match those images, and I just got frustrated and I came home from trips with bad photos. But now, after 20 years, I can't believe I just said that number, 20 years of taking photos, I look back and think, oh, if I could only teach my younger self these things about photography, it would have eliminated so much of that frustration and bad photos. That's what we're going to talk about today, what I wish I would have known a long time ago, and there are nine things that I'm going to show you today. Hi, welcome back. I am Diane, and this is the PhotoFluent channel. And here we help travelers like you turn down the volume of your inner critic, get creative with your camera, so that you can confidently come home from trips with photos that absolutely capture those beautiful experiences. Make sure you subscribe because you'll want to know when all the newest videos come out. Okay, let's talk about those 9 tips that I wish I would have known 20 years ago. The first one is, don't worry so much about having all the right equipment. I wish I could take back the hours that I spent reading reviews and researching which camera, which lenses, which tripod that I needed to have to make good photos. Here's the thing, when you're just getting started, don't worry about having all the best equipment. Don't spend all that money on the right equipment. Get started with whatever you have. As long as you can change camera settings and adjust, say, the aperture, ISO, shutter speed, you will learn and can create great photos. Eventually, maybe you'll want to upgrade, but for now, just get started with what you have. It is not all about the equipment. Okay, since we're talking about equipment, the next tip I want to share with you is, no matter what camera you're using, it's time to get out of auto mode. I know it's easy, and I know you think, my camera's so smart, technology is so good these days, but auto mode is limiting your ability to learn and to create. So I know it's scary to try manual mode, and that's something that people think, I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. I used to think that. My students think that. I don't know why. It's just a mode. It's just a little dial on your camera. You're not going to break anything. But here's the thing too. I am not telling you that to be a good photographer, you have to shoot in manual mode all the time. That's not true. Because it can be intimidating. It can be a lot to think about when you're on the road, out and about, trying to capture photos. You don't have to shoot in manual mode all the time, but it's a great learning tool. If you just get out of automatic mode and try manual while you're home, while you're playing around in your neighborhood, it helps you really understand the settings better. Now, do you have to shoot like that when you travel? No. Do I recommend your next trip you throw it in manual mode and give it a try? Absolutely not. But I'll tell you, a good transition out of automatic mode is aperture priority. But even if you play in manual and use aperture priority as kind of your go-to, that will give you so much more foundational knowledge about how photos are created. So give it a try. Both manual and aperture priority. And of course, I do have a whole video on transitioning out of auto mode, and I will link to that below. Okay, the next tip is, let's talk about the rules. When we're learning about photography, especially composition, there are these rules of composition that you're supposed to follow. This is a step in your learning process. I think when we start off with our camera, we're not really sure what to do. We take photos that aren't necessarily beautiful, and we don't know why. If you heard a funny noise in the background, that's Maggie, my dog. She does not like it when other people walk past. So I'm not going to even edit that out. I'm just going to keep going. Let's talk about those rules. That's where we were. There's the rule of thirds, the rule of odds, the don't put your subject in the middle rule. And like I said, these are all a good step on your learning journey. But if you adhere so tight, if you grab a hold of those rules and think, I can't take a photo unless it follows those rules, it will absolutely stifle your growth and development as a photographer. And in the last video, we talked about developing your photography style. And guess what? You're not going to develop a style if you're so stuck on those rules. Follow them to get an idea for how they're going, and then let them go. And put your subject in the middle. Put your subject in the corner. Put your subject in all different places. Just try all kinds of new things. Let yourself just run wild with the composition. And that's when you'll discover what feels right and resonates with you. All right, the next lesson I learned, I wish I would have learned earlier, was I wish I would have switched to RAW instead of JPEG. I shot in JPEG probably because that's the way my camera was set up when I pulled it out of the box. And I didn't really know that much about digital images. So I didn't know what the difference was, and I just shot in JPEG for a really long time. Well, here's the thing. JPEG, it's a smaller file, but it's smaller because it compresses, so it takes some of that data away. A RAW file gives you so much more potential, so if you do make a little mistake with exposure, and I do, I can do a whole lot with it in editing. JPEG, you don't have that same flexibility, so I wish I would have shot those Peru pictures, for example, in RAW instead of JPEG. All right, for this next one, it's not about camera settings, it's not about your gear. It's about me wishing that I hadn't continuously compared myself to others and judged myself as being not good enough. I would put my camera down thinking, I'm just not a good photographer, because I was always comparing myself to other people. And here's the thing, it's not about being as good as someone else. There's always going to be someone better than you. There's going to be people worse than you. But it's not about judging yourself, comparing yourself on some scale. It's about capturing your images for your own purpose. And it's about sharing them and sharing your experiences. It's about creating memories. So I wish I would have let go of that comparison thing and embraced my images for exactly what they were, and just let that guide my own vision and confidence and development as an artist. Okay, this next tip is not particularly sexy or exciting to talk about, but it's important. Think about your storage and organization of those digital files early on in the process. I didn't. And so all of a sudden, I had thousands of photos floating all over, not organized, and it made me crazy. I couldn't find images that I'd taken. I got to the point I didn't even want to create more photos because I didn't know what to do with them. They would just end up in this black hole where I couldn't find them again. It was very frustrating. And the other thing is, if you have a hard drive crash, and maybe you think, well, that's never happened to me, but it can, and none of your files are backed up, you're going to wish you had a better system. So no matter where you are, just starting off, whether you already have thousands of photos, start today. You can't change what you did yesterday, but you can change what you do today going forward. So come up with a system. If you don't get to organize all the old photos quite yet, take a little chunk at a time. At least start now going forward so that you have them in files, you have a backup system. It's a pretty important part of photography that we don't really like to think about because it's not fun. Okay, this next tip is pretty brief and very practical. Get out your camera and take pictures, right? I know that seems obvious, but I remember back in the day, I always thought I needed another class, another book, another video. And a friend of mine, Bill, if you're watching, I'm talking about you, said, Diane, you don't need another class. You just need to take some pictures. And I went, what? And again, it seems obvious, right? But I always thought I needed to learn more. And what I really needed to do is get out my camera and take more photos. That is such a huge part of learning. I'm not saying courses aren't valuable. I teach courses. You need the information, but until you apply that information with actual photos, it will not make sense and you will not get better. Now here's a good one that I've learned fairly recently, And yeah, it's a little embarrassing it took me this long, but I'm learning it in another context. But when I look back at my photography, I wish I would have thought this way about that. And it's to think like a scientist, not a perfectionist. So when you create photos that don't turn out the way you want them to, or maybe just they're downright bad, instead of criticizing yourself, beating yourself up, playing these stories of, you're not good at this, you'll never figure out camera settings, instead, take a step back and from a scientific standpoint, think about, why didn't they turn out? What could I have done differently? And even if it's feedback you're receiving, now unless it's some troll that just rips apart everybody, you can ignore that. But if you're getting feedback from an instructor, like we do image reviews in the PhotoFluent collective membership, if you're getting feedback, instead of using that again as a way to judge your work, use it as a way to grow. So the perfectionist says, I suck at this, I'm not getting better, or what am I doing wrong? The scientist says, how can I use this information to improve? So that is a great way to look at not just your photography, but a lot of things. Remove yourself emotionally from it and just think of it as, how do I get better? Okay, and for the final tip that we're going to talk about today, this one took me a few years to figure out. But what I figured out is that travel photography is about telling the story of your experience, not just creating a couple of wall-worthy prints for your home. Am I saying don't create beautiful photos that you want to print? Of course not. We all want those spectacular sunrise photos or this beautiful landscape photo. Sure, that's amazing. I have some hanging in my house. But in the old days, that's the only thing that I thought about when I was traveling. Is it wall-worthy? If it wasn't wall-worthy, I didn't even try to take a photo of it. And what I learned and what taught me this really was the blog. My husband and I lived in Toulouse. We had the Breath of French Air blog. And we talked about our experience living there, and we talked about the different places we traveled to. And I wanted to share with my readers, not just pretty photos, but I wanted them to feel like they were there. And what I found out is I started taking details that I never took before. Details that weren't always even pretty. But when I look back now at the comments from the blog and my memories of different trips since I started shooting that way, it's so much richer. I have this grand, detailed story about what happened, what I experienced, what it felt like, looked like. And that, to me, is what travel photography is all about. Of course, there are some beautiful, jaw-dropping, print-worthy photos sprinkled in there, but that's not the only purpose of travel photography. Now, my purpose in telling you these 9 tips that I wish I would have known is so that you don't have to go through the same struggle, the same length of time of struggle that I did. So I hope these help you in your journey. Now, if you want some help with your travel photography learning journey, whether you want to create more beautiful memories of your experiences, or you're a travel content creator and want better images in your blog or in your articles, I have the perfect place for you, and that is the PhotoFluent Collective. It's our photography membership exclusively for female travelers. So there's a link below. Now let me know in the comments, have these been helpful? And what are some of the lessons you learned while you were learning your travel photography skills? I'll see you in the next video.